This is either going to be the longest video ever, or I'm going to cut it down and use only like half of the recording. Oh man. What's going on? I'm John, and in this writing vlog, I'm going to be outlining my very first fantasy novel. As I've been trying to figure out my favorite genre over the last few months, I've been drawn more and more to fantasy. So it is currently in the first place position, so I'm inspired to write a fantasy novel, and for me, the first step to doing that is figuring out the outline, the characters, the plot, the character arcs, all of that good stuff. I'm gonna figure that out in this video. Last time I did my outlining, it was a little bit of a free-for-all, to the point that I don't even really remember how I did it. So this time I'm going to be a little more intentional. I'm going to be using what I learned from reading The Anatomy of Story and going through the various exercises for different parts of my outline. So I'm going to be figuring out the premise statement, the 7-step story structure, which I will eventually expand to the 22 steps, the characters, the moral argument, the plot, and the story world, which I'm actually working on in an entirely separate video where I'm trying to world build like Brandon Sanderson. So look out for that too. So now that we're all on the same page, let's get into this because I am excited to outline this story. Okay, so since it's still pretty early in the morning, 5:21, and there will not be any distractions yet, I'm gonna go and hang out in the living room and figure out these various elements from there. So let's get started. Gotta bring my book. I have a bunch of stuff here that I'm trying to bring. Phone, adjust to the lighting, please. Okay, so we're going to be starting with the premise. And for all of you who are not really familiar with what the premise is, John Truby describes it as the simplest combination of character and plot typically consists of some event that starts the action, some sense of the main character, and some sense of the outcome of the story. So for example, The Godfather. The youngest son of a mafia family takes revenge on the man who shot his father and becomes the new Godfather. So that is what I'm going to be working on for my own story. And it's important to note that the premise is basically the base for the rest of the entire story. So deciding this will impact every other decision in the story. So I want to make sure that I'm giving this the attention and care that it deserves. So let's get into writing the premise. Okay, so I was just exploring ideas for this premise, trying to find ways that I could make it even better, and I came up with a few really cool ideas that I can use to enhance this now. I'm definitely going to include some of these into this story. And I actually already came up with a little bit of a moral decision that the character may have to make at the end, although I still need to figure out a way to have him make it. But things are looking good so far. I'm going to move on to the next step of figuring out this premise, so that one is going to be identifying the challenges present in the story. So basically the things that I'm going to have to overcome in writing this story. Okay, so I just figured out the problems kind of inherent to this story, the challenges that I'm going to have to face in writing it. Now it is time to look into the designing principle. I'm gonna have to reread this section because I don't quite remember exactly what the designing principle is. So I'm just gonna get started on reviewing this section and then figure out exactly how to design my designing principle. Okay, so I'm getting very close to finishing figuring out the premise. Next, I just have to figure out the character change, potential moral decision the character is going to make, and the potential audience appeal. So I'm going to work through all these steps, and then I'll tell you how it all went with designing this premise. Okay, so I've spent almost 2 hours working on this so far, designing this premise, and I have finished the premise and now have a better grasp of what the story is going to look like, kind of the arc of the story. I actually think this is going to be a series, not just a one-off story, because there's far too much character growth to be encompassed in one story. I don't think it would be realistic to have the character accomplish this much in the course of one story, so I probably have to split it up across multiple books so the character can have a smoother trajectory toward that growth. So that is where I am outlining this story. Tomorrow I'm going to have to figure out what the individual steps of the character's growth will be so I can focus on just the first step for the rest of this outlining process and design the first complete story in the series. But for now, I have a 2-mile run to go do. I continued working on the outline using the anatomy story for a few more days, but eventually I ran into a problem. So as I just started doing this process, I realized that I do have some gaps in my understanding of the world, and those gaps are kind of gonna make it difficult to come up with a plot specifically. I'm not sure what to do about that. It reminds me of what I researched before and what Brandon Sanderson was saying about how outlining the story and world building kind of play off each other. So you have to jump back and forth between the two to really get a complete understanding of what you're doing. Although in some cases he did the world building first, like in the Stormlight Archive. I might switch over and do some sort of world building stuff right now, and then after I finish that, I'll come back and continue with figuring out this plot. In my usual position here, I am back, and I'm starting with a new anime here today. But before I do want to give you some sort of like conclusion on the whole watching Fruits Basket, because I watched 3 seasons in a row and it was 60 something episodes, so it was a long little arc in my Japanese learning journey, right? Overall, I really like the show, and I want to dive into one little thing that I learned from the storytelling in this show, because it might actually be relevant for you as well. And this is kind of spoilers if you want to watch this show, so just to let that be known right now. Basically, the way that it introduced the male lead made it seem like a different character was actually supposed to be the male lead. In the beginning of the show, the very first episode, the female lead meets this one character who you would think is the male lead because he's the first one introduced. But that's not the only factor that makes you think that he would be the male lead. In the second season, there are whole episodes that are given to just him, basically. I mean, there's other characters too, but they're centered around him from his perspective. The female lead's not even in the episodes, neither is the real male lead. So these episodes would make you think, oh, well, this character must be really important. For me, at least, I felt like he was actually supposed to be the male lead the whole time up until the moment when it's really starting to look like, oh, wait, this guy is not going to be the one that gets with her. So I was a little bit confused by that. And I think it's an important lesson to take away in anything that you're writing, to make sure it's very obvious to the reader, or in this case, viewer, who the lead characters are, who the most important characters are, so they know who to root for, especially in a romance where it's all about the buildup of tension between these two characters and you rooting for the characters to get together. If you don't know which character to root for, or you're rooting for the wrong character, then it's a little bit weird. Luckily with this show, that was really more like a subplot, so it wasn't a huge deal, but I did find it a little bit weird. Anyway, that is my lesson that I learned from watching this show. Overall, I think it was a really good show, so if you're into anime, maybe check it out. So today, after that very long wrap up, today I'm going to get into a new show, not really new for me, but I'm watching the 3rd season of this show called Teasing Master Takagi-san. At least in English, that's the title. I've already watched season 1 and season 2 and read every single volume of the manga, so there's really nothing new here for me, but I did enjoy all of that, so I'm back and I'm going to watch this one here. It should be very easy Japanese. I should understand pretty much everything, so yeah, it's kind of fun. Solidify my understanding of some grammar at least. Anyway, let's just get started. Good morning, I am back here, and today I'm talking about a little bit of a middle of the road topic. As you know, I'm working on 2 different videos right now, one on outlining the story and one on doing the world building, and this is kind of like a foundational topic that supports both. So as I said yesterday, I was having trouble figuring out what genre I actually want this to fit in. Do I think it's going to be more of a contemporary fantasy, an urban fantasy, or do I think it's going to be more of an epic fantasy, high fantasy sort of story? So that is what I was trying to figure out. And when I thought about it, I definitely do want to have that more old style sort of element where it doesn't feel like it's this completely modern society. So I think that I'm leaning more toward epic fantasy. Ensure that I'm actually fitting the story within the genre. So I'm going to do a little bit more research right now and just try to figure out how many other character perspectives should the story contain. I know A Song of Ice and Fire has like 1 million perspectives. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. There's like a ton. The Stormlight Archive has a fair amount of perspectives already. I mean, in the prologue, we had like 1 million already. In the prologues. So I need to figure out some of these basic details of like, what should I actually be doing in order for it to be a decent fit for this genre? So somebody who sees the title, cover, synopsis, whatever, and expects a story from the genre isn't dissatisfied when they realize, wait a second, this only has one point of view and it's only told in this one location. This is not epic fantasy at all. So that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. Like, what do I need to do to actually make this fit in the genre? So for right now, I'm just going to do a little bit of research, find out exactly what sort of story I should be creating, how many perspectives do I need to include, that sort of information. And then I'm going to get back into the outlining. Okay, so I just did a bunch of research on genre. I think what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to start off in more of a low sort of fantasy. It'll still be a blend between high and low because there will be magic. However, I don't think it's going to be super prevalent in the beginning of the story. And most importantly, I think the scope in the beginning will be more on a personal level rather than these grand world-changing events. Also, I do think that I'm going to be adding 2 main characters at least. I don't really want to have this like humongous cast of characters, but I do think it makes sense to have 3 rather than 2 because 2 kind of starts to feel like a romance when you have dual POV and both these characters getting equal time, even if they're in like different places. Yeah, so I think I'll probably go with at least 3 main characters. Anyway, so that's what I'm thinking as far as like genre right now. I felt like this character's arc wasn't containing enough fantasy elements, so I tried switching it to a different sort of story, but I realized that these other options wouldn't allow me to explore the main reason I started writing the story, the caste system. So I decided to go back to plotting the 22 steps for the original character arc. But during this process, I just kept getting stuck. For now. I even tried switching to the snowflake method, but was still stuck in place. Okay, so I left off yesterday with my extra sort of work where I was using the snowflake method a little bit to try to go through this story and see if everything felt right to me. I think actually what's happening is I'm just feeling like there's so many open questions that I need to do more to actually understand the story. But I think the reality is that I'm not going to understand everything anyway. So what I'm going to do is just work through till the end of this outline, and I'm almost there already, at least for this one character, using the anatomy of story, figuring out exactly what's going to happen in this character's plot. Let's just get into the outlining already. So I got kind of caught up when I was working on these plot points because I couldn't really think of anything that fit within the structure of that point. So what I'm going to do is try to come up with more ways to present challenges for the protagonist, so he's not just going from A to, Z very easily. And I just wanted to add a quick note. I realized that actually one of the main problems that I'm having with outlining this story is that the way that John Tribby talks about the story, he's talking about it very much in the context of 2 characters competing for the same thing, right? And that's the main opposition in the story. It's like a character versus character conflict. However, I think the reason I'm having trouble fitting my story into that mold is because it doesn't necessarily make sense that a single character or even multiple characters would be present at all the times that the hero is trying to work toward his goal. And I think that this is actually a person versus society conflict more than a character versus character conflict, which is why I'm having so much trouble fitting my story into this mold. So I might have to try to outline it in a different way. Since I was having trouble figuring out what the heck I'm going to do with a character versus society story, I got an idea. Wait a second, I have the book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and I've literally never used it to try and outline a story before. What if there's an example of a story like that in the book? I flipped to the table of contents, and what did I find? I found an example. It is definitely more of like an imperfect society that the character is trying to make his way in. So we'll see what they say about it in this, and I will let you know if I think it's actually going to work for me. So I just read through the institutionalized chapter from Save the Cat Writes a Novel to see if this could potentially apply to my story, and I actually do think that it has the potential to apply. So I'm going to work through these steps instead. I started working through the Save the Cat beats, and I already did the opening image, and I'm working through the themes stated right now. I will continue working on these, and hopefully this will give me an overall structure. This is my 3rd attempt here already going through the story. Okay, so I've been working my way through Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and I've gotten to the catalyst so far. Well, I finished the catalyst. I feel like the benefit of this sort of structure is that it's easy to conceptualize. Trying to outline with this structure, since everything is kind of the main things to focus on are all right there for you, it's much easier than having to figure it out all yourself. And also because there's a bunch of examples of stories like the one that you're trying to write and the key elements of them, I think it's also easier to use as a template to create your own story. Anyway, I'm going to continue for now with the debate. So that is the next portion, and I'll have to figure out a few scenes there. I might work on this a little more later today because I want to get this outline done. I want to actually make some good progress on it. I feel like I've been kind of stuck here. I mean, I've made good progress. I figured out details, but I haven't gotten to the point where the whole story is mapped out and it makes sense. I want to be able to get to that point. So for now, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, but I may be back later to work on this some more. So after coming back, I was able to finish the first character's arc very quickly and was ready to figure out the other characters' arcs. Okay, so yesterday I left off telling you that I needed to figure out a little bit more detail around other character perspectives. I have two characters in mind. Both will be necessary for the upcoming problem, and they'll also allow me to show different areas of the world, which is going to be very cool. And I think both of them have pretty interesting bases for their stories as well. Yeah, so somehow we're going to intertwine these three different character arcs, but for now I'm just going to come up with the character arcs themselves, and then I can actually do the intertwining later. So I forgot to say the actual most important part, which is what I'm going to be doing right now. I'm going to first go through Save the Cat Writes a Novel again for these two other characters, and I'm going to figure out how each of their stories is going to progress using that. So let's start on the second character right now. And I forgot to mention that at first I'm going to read through a little bit and try to figure out what the arc is going to look like. I kind of have an idea, but I don't really know which one of the 10 genres or whatever it's going to be. So let's do a little bit of research, try to figure out which one of these fits the best, and then I'll start actually crafting it. Okay. So the ones that I'm thinking about doing for the second character, it's probably going to be a full triumphant because she's kind of an underdog. I don't think it's necessarily institutionalized because I don't think she wants to change or leave the system or, I think it's just more that she doesn't fit in to the system as well as some of the other people. So I think that one makes sense. I haven't read over it yet though, so I'm going to read over that one and see if I think it fits. And then also the third character, I'm not entirely sure what he's going to be yet. He could be Golden Fleece or he could be a full triumphant as well. I'm not sure. So I'm going to read through that real quick and then I'll get started on actually figuring out the details. Okay, so I just read through the full triumphant and I think it fits well. So I'm going to start plotting out the second character's story. Okay, so I just realized that I never actually came up with all of the details for the second character, like their weakness, their need, their desire, all sorts of stuff like that. So I'm going to come up with these basics about the character first, and then I can actually come up with the story. Okay, so I finally figured out some of the information about the character herself, and now I need to go into actually plotting out this story, starting with the opening image. So let's get right into that. Okay, so I know I said I was going to get into the actual plotting out her story, the second character, but I realized that these characters actually have self-contained stories right now, in that they don't necessarily affect each other in any specific way. So because of that, I was trying to see if there's some sort of precedent for people doing this in previous stories, because I wanted to know if it actually makes sense to plot out the story this way or if I need to make these characters' stories connect with each other earlier than I was thinking. The way that I was thinking about it is that I was going to start with these characters' stories being separate. The first book was going to basically introduce the different characters, and each of them would have their own sort of story. They would all be connected, obviously, because they live in the same world, but I was wondering if they actually need to be connected in the sense that they actually meet each other or that they're actually working on something similar in the end. So long story short, I did find some examples that have done this sort of story where they are pretty disconnected, and I do think I'm going to keep them pretty disconnected. However, I do want to have some sort of connection between them, or at least hint at the connection that's going to come in the future. So I think that I'm headed in the right direction. I'm just going to plot out her full arc first, and then once I've figured out her arc in relation to his, then maybe I can start to see how they could affect each other a little bit, if only in events that are happening in one person's are known about in the other person's arc because of the traveling of news or whatever. So I think that that's the approach that I'd rather take here in the beginning in this first book, rather than having the characters all somehow connect to the end when it doesn't really make sense to do given the arc that I've already created for the first character. Not that that can't change, but I don't really see that as being where I want to go with this first book. So I think I want to have them stay disconnected, but have the characters' disconnected actions be at least transmitted to the other characters so that they know about it, potentially have some sort of impact on the other characters, but not a direct impact of them meeting each other. All of that to say, I just figured out how I'm going to proceed, so now I'm actually ready to start on this plot for this second character. Okay, so I've done a few of these plot points, but I kind of got a little distracted because this character, this female aspiring, I couldn't remember that word, what the heck? This female aspiring warrior, because of her size, she's pretty small even for a normal like woman of this time period or whatever. Because of her size, she has like a huge disadvantage. So I was trying to think the way that I thought that would be like her fighting style would be something I was gonna say pokey. Basically, that she would use a weapon that is more suited for stabbing than for slashing. And she'd basically just try to get in between the gaps in armor, or she would stab through the mail with a very thin sword or dagger. And then she would rely on her small size and her ability to move more quickly to basically survive. So that was the way that I was thinking about this character's fighting style, but I realized that I didn't know if it's actually possible to stab between plate armor or through mail or any of that stuff. So I kind of went down the rabbit hole just now for the last, 30 minutes. And I did learn one thing, which is really something that I should have known in the past, because I read this book way back in elementary school, and it was an encyclopedia of weaponry, basically. From the beginning, it was like stone stuff, like a slingshot, all sorts of stuff like that, like all the way to the most advanced weapons, right? And I used to flip through this book when I was a little kid, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. So I totally do have the potential to become a nerd in that. So that might be something that I end up making an interesting part of the world building that I dive into a little more, or especially for her story, since it's really relevant to the story, the types of weapons that they're using and the fighting styles and whatnot. Anyway, just wanted to let you know what's kind of going on in my brain right now, and I'm actually going to get into figuring out these beats a little bit more. I got through the first two, the opening image and theme stated, so I'm going to get back into working on these beats, figuring out a little more of the story. I would like to get at least halfway into her story, or at least finish the fun and games, because that's like a long one. Okay, so I have gotten all the way up to finishing the catalyst, and I like the way this story is going, and I think that her character arc is actually going to be really fun. This character I already like, so she's definitely going to be a lot of fun to write. Anyway, though, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from working on this right now. I've already been doing this for nearly 4 hours. I'm going to read a little bit of The Way of Kings. I'm going to eat some breakfast, and then I'll come back and continue working on this. But for now, it is break time. Okay, so when we last left off, I was working on the catalyst. Since then, it's actually been quite a while. I had a few chores to do, and then also I was reading the Stormlight Archive, eating breakfast. And I do want to say one thing about the Stormlight Archive so far. I am very much enjoying it. The learning curve in the beginning, as Brendan Sanderson said, was kind of brutal. I'm not gonna lie, like I almost thought about putting the book down, but I had faith that it was going to get better, but I was like, there were some times there where I was like, oh my god, this is so long. I don't understand anything. But now that I'm, into the book, now that I know enough about what's going on, much more enjoyable. Anyway, though, I don't want to totally nerd out about this book. I want to continue working on my own book. I need to start on the debate in this second character's perspective. So let's just get into working on that, and that'll be that. Okay, so I just worked my way through the debate, the break into two, the B story character, and now I'm going to get into the fun and games, which is going to be pretty long. I'm just going to be coming up with a bunch of subplots, basically creating the backbone of the story with those throughout the second act. I may also work on the midpoint today if I have time, but we'll see what happens because last time the fun and games took me quite a while to actually finish. I feel like I kind of like this girl's arc more than I like the first story that I came up with here. The first character. I like the first character because I like what his story is talking about, but I like the second one because it's just fun. So anyway, I'm gonna keep working on this. Okay, so I actually just finished not only the fun and games, but also the midpoint. So I'm actually making really good progress, and now all I have left is bad guys close in, all is lost, dark moment, break into 3 finale, and the final image. But that's actually not that much considering all I've done so far. I only have 6 out of 15 more beats left to go. So I am making really good progress, and I think I should have this one done by tomorrow, and then I'll be able to get started on the third character's arc. Okay, so as I talked about yesterday, I'm going to be working on finishing up this second character's arc. I am starting with bad guys close in, so I'm pretty far along with the story, but I've got big stuff to work on to finish this up. I would definitely like to finish that today, but really I would like to work on the third character as well. Okay, so far I finished Bad Guys Close In, All is Lost, and The Dark Night of the Soul. Now I'm going to figure out the break into 3, the finale, and the final image. Okay, so I just finished up the last few beats of her arc, so I'm feeling good about her arc as well. But for now, I'm going to move on to working on the third character and trying to figure out, well, first of all, who they are. There's 2 different sorts of characters that I'm considering for this role. One will be this sort of scholarly character that's going to be useful for a mystery that this character is going to have to unravel to help the other ones in the future. And another character that might be useful is like a nobility sort of character, somebody who's already of a high rank in the society, who has some sort of position close to the ruling government structure, and this person's able to give the readers a higher level view of what's going on in the society and kind of set the context for what's going on with these other 2 characters, kind of what's happening at a countrywide level and a worldwide level. So I think that could be useful as well. I think I'll probably just choose one of those characters for now to work with. I don't necessarily need to introduce the scholar character in this book, so I'm kind of thinking that they might come a little bit later because I don't think that the mystery will be so relevant at this point, and I don't really know what I could do with them that wouldn't feel kind of repetitive to the other characters. But I do think it'd be interesting to have a little bit of a different sort of character perspective. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to work with this third character, the political maneuverings sort of character, and that'll be interesting. Okay, so since I don't really know what type of story I want to tell from this character's perspective, I'm just going to do a little bit of brainstorming to try and actually figure out what types of stories would be interesting, what kinds of things would I like to do, and then I can actually classify it in some sort of genre and start planning with that in mind. There's 2 different genres that I thought this character's story could actually fit into. The first is the whodunit, basically. So, well, I don't even know, is that what they called it? I don't know, the mystery, basically. This one is probably the most complex plot to create among these 10 different genres in Save the Cat. It's kind of difficult and maybe a little much for me to take on at this stage in my writing journey. I don't know. I'm tempted to do it because I think it'd be really fun, but to take on this task at the same time that I'm also trying to tell the story of 2 different other characters and that I have to do world building does seem like it's kind of a lot to take on, a little bit overwhelming potentially. And also another element of this is that in order to actually plot out this, I would need to know some other elements of the story, particularly some world building elements that I've been trying to put off, like the actual people that would be present in this capital city and the structure of the government, so I know why certain people would care about certain things or who would have motivations to do whatever thing is going to happen. That definitely adds a little bit of complication to this plotting portion. The alternative is doing the dude with a problem. I think that one would be easier to do But here's the problem that I'm having with choosing that one. I don't really want to have a life or death battle at the end. I don't know. I still have to think about it a little bit more, but this is kind of like holding me up, or I've been trying to figure this out already for like more than an hour. So this kind of decision is giving me a little bit of a roadblock. I'm gonna have to think about it a little more the rest of the day, and hopefully I'll be able to figure out where I'm gonna go with this. Okay, so I had to come back to my room because my computer was on 1% battery. So we're back here for a little bit. I was just researching a little bit more. To be completely honest, I was listening to some episodes of Writing Excuses, particularly about the government and political intrigue, because I was trying to figure out kind of how this sort of story should be told and what sort of things to consider when coming up with the government, so that I know what I actually need if I'm going to do this detective story, which I think I actually am going to do. Well, it's not really you know what I mean. Cozy, but maybe violent mystery. So that's kind of a contradiction. Anyway, right now it is already 9 o'clock. So I'm going to go on my run, eat breakfast. You know the deal. If you've heard this a few days, you already know what I'm going to do. Run, breakfast, way of kings. So I'm going to go on that break and I will see you in a little bit. Okay, so I'm back here again, ready to work on outlining for the third character. As I said before, I was in this place of not really knowing what to do next. I've decided to tell the mystery sort of story. It's going to have the political sort of intrigue included. That's going to be the fun part about this character's story, basically. However, I need to do a tiny bit of world building. I'm going to do the bare minimum of world building, basically, in order to actually be able to complete the outline for this character. I need to know some basics about the government structure at the very least, so that I know what sorts of people, if not named, but what sorts of positions and roles are there in the government, so that I at least know who the main actors are in this story, so that I can give them different roles corresponding to the overall mystery, right? That is what I'm trying to figure out. I'm going to do that basic world building now. Okay, so basically I just spent the last, 2 hours working on researching. I was trying to figure out some of these details of the government and how all this stuff works. So I took a bunch of notes. And I think I understand somewhat how this government may end up working, but I need to figure out more details before I'm actually ready to set up this whole structure and decide who's who and whatnot. So tomorrow I'll probably do a little more research, and then I'll get into actually figuring out the structure, which will allow me to figure out the mystery, which will allow me to actually plot the story. So that is what we're going for right here, and I will get back to you tomorrow. 5 a.m. right now. And I am getting started on working on figuring out the government structure so that I can continue with the plotting. I think I have enough information that I learned yesterday in reading over. I was reading over more Japanese history because it was fun. I was just reading over like the political structure and how it evolved, and the aristocratic kind of system and how that evolved along with the rest of the political structure. So basically, I spent like 2 hours doing that, but it was enjoyable enough, and I think that it makes sense now. I can visualize how this sort of system works in a more old society. So I think that I should be able to come up with my own sort of rendition and create that here today. That will give me the characters that I need to work with, as well as whatever the situations and places and levers of power, and those will be useful for creating this mystery aspect. Okay, so I just wanted to give you one little update here because I haven't talked to you in a while. What I've been working on, as I mentioned earlier this morning, is figuring out the background as far as what the actual government structure is like, so that I know how to create this sort of mystery. And I've also been working on the actual mystery itself, like what is going to happen such that it would be worth investigating and that would be an interesting thing to investigate. And how does it connect with the sort of political structure of this government and the competition for power, basically. So I figured out a mystery there, and now I'm just trying to work out, well, in mysteries they call it the plot behind the plot. So basically what the criminal did leading up to the event. By knowing that, and by knowing kind of how things went, you can better craft the actual events of the plot when the detective is trying to figure stuff out. Detective. Anyway, though, I'm done for today working on this, but tomorrow I'm going to come back and finish up this aspect of the planning, as well as get started on the actual plotting of the story. Thankfully, because it's starting to get late in the week here, and I wanted to finish this a little faster. Anyway, though, things are coming along finally. This was a lot more involved than the process of figuring out the second story, since that was pretty much adventure. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so today I'm going to continue working on figuring out the mystery, the plot behind the plot, as I talked about yesterday. I'm figuring out what the villain was. The villain, you know, what they're doing, how they planned in order to make sure that this was going to work out successfully for them. I'm trying to think through the situation and make it so that this character will have some sort of win from the situation no matter what the outcome is. Even if the detective character finds out what he did, I want it to be well thought out on his side so that it feels like he's actually a thoughtful, sort of competent character for the detective character to spar with rather than somebody who just does something stupid. Anyway, so what I'm going to be working on now is figuring that part out, and then the rest of the day I would really like to actually finish plotting out this story today. That's very ambitious, I know. Given that I haven't even started on it, I haven't even figured out the character and the information about them. Yeah, I would really like to finish wrapping up this character's story within this book today. Because full disclosure, I'm trying to finish this video by the end of the week. I've been working on it for quite a while, and it's already Thursday. It's going to take a while to edit, and that is why I need to finish today. But also, I just want to get started on this. This is a really cool, interesting world. I love the different arcs that I've created here, and I want to be able to do the world building as well. The whole point of me finishing the plot and getting something down was to be able to actually get started on the world building. So after finishing this, I'm going to be able to go back and continue working on the world building, which will be fun. So that's another reason why this is important for me to finish today. Okay, so I was just figuring out a ton of different stuff. First of all, I spent like an hour and 30 minutes on this one sort of idea for a secret because I was realizing that this character that I have in the mystery, he doesn't have such a motive that he would be willing to take such a big risk. So I figured out a secret that he could have that would actually give him motive because this person knows about the secret. Basically, this person would be a really big obstacle for him politically if he didn't get rid of him. That's me being like really vague because I'm literally saying he a million times. But basically, I ended up figuring out a secret that explains why the character who is going to be the murderer character did the thing that he did. I went through one secret that I was initially thinking made sense, but the reason why I didn't end up sticking with it was because I realized that the character who knew about the secret, who ends up being the victim of the murder, revealing that secret wouldn't be advantageous to him because it would hurt his position and the things that he actually likes. So basically, I figured out the motive and I beefed it up a little bit to make sense of why this character would commit the murder. Now I'm actually ready to start plotting out the story, I think. I don't really know how to do this because I never plotted out a mystery story before, but I need to figure out the character details first for the detective character. I know what position he has in the government, but I don't really know what he's going to be like yet. So I have to figure out those details. Oh, and I totally forgot to mention, I figured out one potential magic system idea as well, because it's relevant to the secret that the murderer is trying to hide, and how the murder victim actually had leverage against the murderer. And I think it's actually a pretty cool sort of magic. That's what I've got right now. I'm gonna get back into actually coming up with the details for this character and then actually working on the plot. Okay, so I figured out some basic details about the character, like their weakness, their need, desire, all that good stuff. And now I'm ready to actually get on to plotting the story, beginning to actually come up with this story. This one is going to be pretty difficult because I've literally never written a mystery before. Well, I haven't written very many stories before, so pretty much name a story and I haven't written it. Romance? No. Mystery? No. Anyway, so I'm gonna have to figure out how all this is going to work, how the revelation of the clues is going to work, the major moments of the plot that really stand out, and how that is going to work as well. So I'm going to get right into that. And let's see where it takes me. Let's see how this works out. Okay, so it is afternoon now. I was working this morning on figuring out the rest of the mystery part of the plot. For the most part, I've done so. At least I figured out the information that the characters are going to need to learn. I'm not exactly sure when or how they're going to learn them, like the clues basically. So I might figure out how these clues are going to come about. And then after I do that, I'll be ready to actually start plotting out the story for real. So that is what I'm working on right now, and I'm going to get right into it. Okay, so I just finished coming up with all these clues. So now it is time to actually start plotting this story. Finally. How many days have I been working on this one character's arc? Like 3 days already? Anyway, let's get into this. I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to finish it today, but I'm gonna do my best. We're gonna see how far I can get. It is already 1:30, so I got 2 hours at the very least to work on this. Let's go. Let's see what we can do. Okay, I just figured out a bunch of the details of this story and plot. So basically, I worked all the way from the beginning of the story to the midpoint. I haven't actually done the midpoint yet, but tomorrow I'm planning on doing the midpoint all the way till the end. Today, I'm going to work from the midpoint to the end of the story. So let's just get right into it. I just finished plotting the third character's arc. That was good. Yeah, so basically, 36 pages later, 13,400 words later, I finished outlining these 3 characters' arcs. And that's really only half of this whole process. There was actually 68 pages of outlining overall, but a lot of it I ended up not using as much because I ended up relying on the save the cat method for the outlining. So I have finished outlining this third character's arc, and let me just take a moment to say this is a really cool one. It was very difficult to come up with, and I think I still need to move specific scenes around a little bit, but I'm not plotting out the scenes yet. But when I come back and plot out the scenes for each of these different characters, then I'm going to be able to move some things around and make sure that the events are happening in the right order. I have finished for now with this plotting, and this last storyline actually ends on a pretty huge cliffhanger. It fulfills what the reader would want from the story because it's literally like, you know, this character's arc is about solving the mystery and finding out what happened. He finds out what happens, but let's just say things don't go as planned and big things are coming for the next book in the series. But for now, I actually am going to stop with this outlining because I think that I've spent so much time looking at these outlines, my eyes are glazing over when I'm trying to read through them again because I've looked at them a million times already. So I'm going to go into world building, finish up the last bits of world building that I haven't done. I'm going to be working on that in the next video. I'm going to work on this world building. I also still need to give characters names because right now I'm literally calling them like their title. In this recent one, it was like Prince 1, Prince 2, Prince 3. And then in some of my other ones, it was like friend. That's a character's name, right? So there's still a lot of things that I need to do before I actually get into writing this story. But for now, what I want to do is I want to reflect a little bit on this experience, kind of share what I learned because this process took much longer than I thought it was going to. And I had a lot of stops and starts. And I think by reflecting on what I learned here, I might be able to help you avoid making some of the mistakes that I made while I was doing this process. I'm going to take some time to reflect on this, and then I'm going to get back to you and tell you kind of what I feel like I learned from this process. The first one might be obvious based on some of the problems that I had earlier on that we talked about, but perfectionism is the enemy. Like literally, I did such a bad job with perfectionism in the beginning that I really struggled with it because I was trying to first come up with the perfect world and get everything correct about the world. And then once I had everything correct about the world, then I can get everything correct about the outline. But in reality, this wasn't going to happen because the world, the characters, and the actual plot are very interconnected. And if you change an element of any of these things, likely something from one of the others or both of the others is going to have to change as well. So trying to perfectly design the plot or world building in advance is really a fool's errand. And I was totally falling prey to that in the beginning. And because of this, I ended up spending multiple weeks trying to work on this process and making very little progress. And it wasn't until I decided that I was just going to get something down, that I was going to do whatever it took. And when I finally committed to doing one thing and just being willing to get it wrong, I finished the whole process of outlining 3 characters in a single week, where it took me multiple weeks and I didn't even finish the process with 1 character before. The long story short is, do not allow perfectionism to get in your way. Just be willing to make mistakes, be willing to get things wrong, and you can fix them later. You know, just get something down, get it started, and realize that it's a process, not something that you have to get perfect the first time. I need some water, one sec. My throat's a little bit... Trying to open this bottle with one hand, it's a little rough. Back on topic. So another thing is to make sure that you start with brainstorming, because in the beginning for the first 2 characters, I didn't do any brainstorming. I just dove right in and started trying to outline their arcs. You know, I figured out some things like about the character themselves, but I didn't really do any brainstorming to try and figure out what would be some interesting things to include based on this premise. I really think that it would have helped me speed things up a little bit if I had done some brainstorming, because for the third character, for the actual mystery, because this was so complex and I needed to figure out a lot of things in advance, I did a lot of brainstorming, and when it came time to actually do the outline, it was much faster than the process of doing the outline for the other two. Part of that is because I already was familiar enough with the Save the Cat method that it was pretty easy for me to figure out what's going to go in there without having to read over everything. Honestly, that's probably a large part of it. But also, I think that doing brainstorming in the beginning allowed me to have the ideas more readily available, so that when I had a certain moment of the story that I was looking for, I knew what to plug in there because I'd already thought of so many different things. Brainstorming, start with it first, then go into the outlining. Now, this third one is really important, and it doesn't just apply to outlining or even writing. It applies to life in general. And this is, do what works. Don't allow yourself to be biased against a certain method or a certain way of doing things. Be open to doing whatever it's going to take that will work for what you're trying to do. So for example, I bought Save the Cat a while back from one of those, affiliate links on some list that somebody said, oh, these are good writing books. I bought all of those or whatever. But I bought this book a while back and I opened it and looked at it a little bit. But at the time, when I saw that they literally break down stories into 10 different genres, I thought that it was just too formulaic. I thought that it couldn't possibly apply for that many stories, and honestly, it just felt like it was paint by numbers. I want to understand telling stories in a very deep level, so why am I going to do such a basic process? This is what I was thinking at the time. But in reality, I wasn't really giving it a fair chance, and my own limiting belief, my own biases toward using Save the Cat prevented me from actually taking advantage of something that ended up being really valuable for me and ended up actually making this process much more easy and simple for me. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what method you use to outline. What matters is that you create a story that's actually good and a story that's actually going to be enjoyable for your readers and actually going to have some sort of impact on them. So I think this was a really important lesson for me, to not let my ego get in the way and think that I'm above a certain method of doing something. And I don't think I was thinking about it consciously like that, but I think that unconsciously I was just looking down on this method. And I don't think that's right. I think that whatever you can use to do what you want to do, whatever is going to be effective for you, is what you should do. And that's really what I want to do with this channel, take you through this journey with me and share what has been effective for me and hopefully will be effective for you as well. So if you like this video, make sure to smash that like button so that YouTube knows to share with other writers like you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, so I actually just finished not only what's the other one called? I'm so bad about these names. I think Shalon is the girl, but I might be wrong about that name, so don't hold me to it. And then also the other guy, I don't remember his name for real, but the prince guy. Everybody knows, the high prince guy. You know what I'm talking about.